Oh, wow. People are already starting to come in. I can see the numbers popping up. We're just going to wait a minute. Those of you who've been here before, we're just going to wait a couple of minutes to let folks come in. We had a lot of registrations for this event, which I'm not surprised. It's such a great topic that I feel like just isn't talked about enough.
It feels a little new, which is weird because it's not new. It's been around for a long time.
That is the perfect way to describe it. It feels new, but it's not.
Yeah.
And I think it's like the way we talk about it as well. Do you know what I mean? I think we think about the staff plus path a lot of times is like around a technical side, but I think there's a new conversation that's been emerging about what does it really mean and what are the things that you really need to do.
Right. A lot of stuff that was unspoken, the sort of you know the role when you see it, you're doing it, you think you're doing it. And now we're sort of making it a little more explicit, which I think is good.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's a kind of a similar conversation when people have feedback with me, like people have said they get the feedback, be more leaderly. Okay, well, what does that mean? And sort of like, I'll know it when I see it, which is similar to like what I think has happened in this role before as well, right? I know it when I see it. Okay, great. That's not really helpful for me.
You should have more impact. And I was like, oh, okay. What does that mean? You should influence without authority. Good luck.
Yeah. Here you go. Off you go.
Yeah. It's like, cool. I will go do that.
Right. Okay, now what? That's what I love about your book. We're going to just let a few more people. I promise you, don't worry. You did not enter in the middle of our conversation. Tanya and I are just kind of chit-chatting for a minute while we're letting everybody come in. We're just giving our own thoughts about this. I'm so excited. I mean, you and I have talked and people have gone to my workshops know I have my dad was a mechanical engineer for GM. And he built prototypes and he didn't want to go the manager and leader path. And so he wrote I heard about his path at dinner all the time. And so that pain of like the IC, the technical IC path. Because it was much earlier. And so he struggled a lot, but there's something really about this path that I love that we're talking about it. And I love that we're having you on today.
Thank you. I'm very excited to be here and talking about it.
Yeah, it really resonates. I'm still trying to help my dad, even though he's long retired. I'm still like trying to make my dad's work environment better for him because I feel like they didn't understand him at all. And one quick tiny tidbit or story, my dad worked for GM, and at the time, the way that they did levels, because he didn't want to be in management or leadership in a formal way, they put him $1 below the bonus pool.
Wait, what does that mean below the bonus pool? Like he wasn't eligible?
So exactly. So if he had made $1 more, he could have been eligible for bonuses, but because he refused to be in management and leadership, he was not eligible for bonuses. Mm-hmm.
Wow. I mean, cool that he stuck to it anyway. He's just like,
yeah, my dad is like, I know who I am. I know what I'm good at. I just want to put my head and invent things. And he has patents from multiple patents, and he's been on engineering magazine covers and things like that. But anyway, that's just sort of my history, why I care about this topic so much. I focus on a different aspect of leadership, but it's just so important. And for all of you here, everyone who's interested in this topic, I'm so excited to have you here, and we're talking about it today. All right, I'm going to stop talking about my dad, beloved as he is. I think we need to get started talking and talk to Tanya.
All righty.
So thank you for joining and welcome to LeadDev Bookmarked.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, I already said I'm excited. LeadDev is a global community of engineering leaders who come together to discuss all things leadership, teams, tools, and tech. Bookmarked is our monthly book club that takes place on the first Tuesday of every month. Our sessions cover an array of engineering and leadership books that our awesome LeadDev audience can draw insights and practical experiences from. I'm Suzan Bond, and I'll be your moderator. I'm a former COO of a scaling startup and an executive coach. My specialty is tech leaders. You can find me on Twitter at my name. A quick note also to mention that LeadDev is currently doing some research around their Staff Plus community for some exciting things in the new year. So if you're a senior IC staff, like IC staff engineer or above, They'd love to hear from you. There's a link to a super quick survey in the LeadDev Bookmarked and Staff Plus Slack channels. If you could spend just a few minutes filling that out, that would be great. Also, feel free to share with your colleagues. The more, the merrier. But back to today. Today we'll be talking about the Staff Engineer's Path, a guide for individual contributors navigating growth and change. If you have questions for Tanya, please pop them in the Q&A feature on the Zoom. So Tanya Reilly has over 20 years of experience in software engineering. She's currently a senior principal engineer at Squarespace, working on platform architecture and technical strategy. Before that, she was a staff engineer at Google, responsible for some of the largest distributed systems on the planet. She likes walking in nature, coding on trains, and watching cartoons with her kid. Oh, so fun. She's also the host of LeadDev Staff Plus Conference, which will be back in New York on March 16th. By the way, the CFPs for this event are open until November 14th. So please submit your ideas. Hi, Tanya. Now
Hello.
We're ready to finally talk to you officially.
All right. Yeah.
So,
at CFP, by the way, first-time speakers really welcome. We would love to hear from you.
Yeah,
okay, great. I'll respect
Oh, no, it's great. No, it's a great point, because I do think sometimes people think, oh, I have to be really experienced to get selected, and that's just not true.
Right.
Yeah, it's a great point. So put your ideas in. So I'd love to know, how did this book come about?
Ooh, okay. So this is a long story, but about 3.5 years ago, I realized that I was having the same conversations over and over again with staff engineers and their managers. Like, what even is my job and am I doing it? Like, what a fundamental question. I want to promote this person, but they're doing all of this leadership stuff and they're not coding very much. Do I need to get them to code more so I can promote them to staff engineer? And I found that I was giving the same answers again and again, or like kind of evolving how I thought about it. And I thought, someone should write a book about this. Like, it's wild that there's no book about this. No one knows what a staff engineer is. It was the same when I became a staff engineer. There was the same sense of like, I don't know what's expected of me. Like, the sense that the game has changed and now the rules are secret. In the foreword for my book, Camille Fournier wrote that we had the sense that part of the criteria for being a staff engineer was figuring out how to become a staff engineer. Like, it's like so secret and mysterious. I thought some more about this. Someone should write a book. And I was like, I wonder if that could be me. Could I write that book? And I remembered Lara Hogan, who is amazing, saying at an event that she was cool with people reaching out to her if they had a topic that they were interested in and thought she would be interested in, like that was an okay thing to do, to just like say, hey, would you like to chat about blah? And so I just sort of cold DM'd her on Twitter. Like she sort of knew who I was, I think. I cold DM'd her on Twitter and I was like, could I, do you think, write a book? And she was amazing. She gave me lots of advice. She introduced me to people and she sort of helped me believe, like I went from like, what even are books? How do books happen? They magic into existence, right? So she talked me through how that works. And I wrote a proposal and she introduced me to her publisher and I gave them my proposal and they said no. They were like, this is a nice proposal. We think you would do a good job, but the audience is so small. There are really few staff engineers. We believe that the audience that exists really want this book, but there's just not enough. I was like, yeah, I respect that. But at the time, I was applying to be a member of the Brooklyn Writer Space, which if you're in Brooklyn, I really recommend the Brooklyn Writer Space. And I was telling the woman who was giving me the tour, I just got my first rejection. I was very proud. And she was like, oh, you're a real writer now. It won't be your last. And I was like, that's oddly motivational. So I should go again, I thought I'll write it anyway. So then I did, do you know NaNoWriMo, National Novel Writing Month? It's November. It starts today, actually. So anyone who is thinking, you got a book and this is the day to start it. And you write like 1,700 words a month, for or 1,700 words a day for a month. And then at the end, so I kind of blurped out this like 53,000 words on staff engineering over the course of November 2019. Complete garbage, let's be clear, like terrible. But it's so much easier to go from like terrible to kind of okay, much easier than it is to go from I have an empty page where I would like there to be a book. And so so now I have this terrible first draft, and I pitched it again to another publisher, and it came back like it was on a piece of elastic. It was just like, nope, nobody wants this. I was like, okay, that's fine. They said no audience. They were very nice, but they were like, there's just no audience. So around the same time, Will Larson started posting these regular interviews with staff engineers. And it was really cool. Like, if people have probably seen them now, there's staffeng.com. I think it was back then they were on his own website. I think it was before he made that, staffeng.com. And I thought, I have a spidey sense here. This man is writing a book about staff engineering. I can sense that. And like, Will is this amazing author. He'd written An Elegant Puzzle, which is like, it's a really good book. It's also a gorgeous book. We read it in book club here. And I was like, kind of mixed feelings now, because A, cool, there will be a really good book on staff engineering, and B, but maybe I don't need to do one then, because like, I'm not going to try and write a second book on staff engineering. Well, then I thought, there are multiple books on management. There are lots of books on management. Probably the industry could handle too. So, this is such a long story.
It's a great story.
So I did. I had such success with cold DMing Lara Hogan. I was like, I guess I could do that again. And I cold DM'd Will Larson, this like famous author guy. And he had retweeted some of my stuff and linked to some of my stuff. So again, it wasn't completely cold, but I thought he knew who I was, but we had no prior relationship. We'd never met. And I DM'd him and I was like, it feels like maybe you're writing a book on staff engineering. Do you have a sense for what the audience is? I've had these rejections, and he didn't like. So in the book, I write about sponsorship, which is an idea I got from I learned about from Lara Hogan. This idea of helping somebody else, not just giving them like mentorship or whatever, but going out of your way to help them. And Will did that. It was really amazing. So he set up a call with me. He understood what I was trying to do, gave me really good advice, introduced me to people, and really looked out for ways to help me out, which is amazing. Like, I want to pay that forward forever. And Lara did as well, of course. There's good people out there. We have a nice industry. Anyway, so then the pandemic happened. So I was like, okay, now I know what to do. Pandemic happened and I did nothing. I think I pitched the book one more time, got one more rejection. It's like, it's okay. After the pandemic, which can't last for more than a few months, right? After the pandemic, I'll come back to this. And I just, I didn't. It was 9 months. It was the following year. And Will finished his book and he published it. And he asked me to write the foreword, which again, I'm like this nobody on the internet. Like, he could have gotten someone famous to write his foreword, but he asked me to do that. And that was incredibly nice. And I did that. And then the book sold really well. Like, it was everywhere for a while. Everyone was talking about how great it was, which, by the way, it's great. People should read it.
Yep, it is.
And the audience for it was really clear. And a few months after that, Melissa from O'Reilly mailed me and was like, do you want to have a chat about writing a book about staff engineering? And I was like, why, yes, in fact, here are 53,000 garbage words.
The thing, if I could say, the thing that's so interesting about that story that stands out for me that I didn't know was that you had at least 2, if not more, publishers say there's no audience for this book, which honestly surprises me. What do you mean? There are so many people. What? There's such a dearth of books in this space, and lots of people operating in this space, or want to be in this space, or managing and leading people who are doing this role.
Right. And even people who are doing, like, sure, the title staff engineer, that's not ubiquitous. We call them a lot of things. Right. But there are tech leads and team leads and lead engineers. And, there's just a lot of people in this weird non-manager leadership role. We just weren't talking about it, it turned out.
Yeah.
So, since then, like, we've got communities formed, and we've got the Staff Plus conference, which I love, and there's Slack channels and so on. We're like, it's like all these people suddenly appeared. Like it feels like a flash mob of staff engineers just come from everywhere. Where were they? It's cool.
Yeah, right. It's like, but I think that those books have helped to bring awareness that that community is there and help to collect the community, which I think is great for everyone. So I'm curious about how you see the staff engineer role. Like, I know you think there are like a few areas that they need to work. And we talked in earlier, like, it's not just technical and that whole idea of like, do I need to make them code more to get them promoted? What do you see? How do you see that role in the areas they need to work in?
So I have my mental model of this is that I've sort of three pillars of staff engineering, or staff plus engineering, which means, all the roles from all the roles above senior. The three pillars I think of are big picture, execution, and leveling up. So being able to see a bigger picture than other people. And that's both in space and time. So being able to not just look at how to solve a problem, but understand whether the problem is worth solving, whether it's the highest priority. Not look at like what's just the most important problem for your team, for your corner of the org, but like look beyond the local maximum for your team and seeing like what does the business need, or what does if you go really broad, like what does the industry need, or what is important to do, but also in time, like not just what are we doing this sprint, this quarter, this half year, but where do we need to be next year? Because a year it's really not a long time. And being able to see beyond, writing code or creating something and thinking, this will still be here in 5 years. This code might still be here in 10 years. Like, what does that mean? So being able to see a bit bigger, that's the first one. The second one is this executing on bigger projects. And I mean, the whole way through an engineer's career, they're going to, and actually not engineers, so, we take on projects, you take on work and you do it, but the projects get bigger. They get more ambiguous and they get more kind of mucky. And there's like the stuff that is, you need to understand, there's humaning skills as well as technical skills to solve them. And then the third one is just the sense of leveling up, making your team or your group or your organization or your company able to do something that they weren't able to do before. Like a mix of individual leveling people up through mentoring or through sponsorship, through coaching, through teaching, and sort of the bigger taking the culture changes that make your organization better at something they need to be better at, and leveling yourself up too, because I feel like there's a sort of a big part of the job is deliberately building your own skills and getting better at what you're doing. So like these three pillars, but I think there's a foundational piece as well, which is that these have to come on top of technical skills. Like you can't just turn up with these three pillars without the background or the technical knowledge to back it up. So when you see the big picture and decide what's important, you also need a sense for what's feasible. Like what can we do with technology? Like how long will this take? When you do big projects, you have to actually be able to solve the problems and so on. Like when you're setting best practices, you have to really know what the best practices are for your organization. So that's how I think about it anyway. These three pillars and the foundations, like these very solid technical foundations.
Oh, that's great. I love that too. That there's these three pillars with the foundation on the technical. One thing that you talk about staff engineering and it being a leadership role, not a management one, which you and we completely agree on this. Like, I think there's also a lot of confusion between what is leadership and what is management. I think we use the words interchangeably, and I'm like, no, they're not the same word. And I think it really, is important when it comes to the staff plus. I'd love to hear the way that you distinguish between the staff plus leadership versus the other side of that.
Yeah, I mean, I've noticed that if you look for books on leadership, it's almost all about how to be someone's boss. Like leadership as you have direct authority and you're probably deciding compensation for people and you're running an organization or a team.
Yep.
But
yep.
I think leadership is like, that's management for sure, but there's so much more to it. I want to start by saying, like, in some ways it depends, because we say a staff engineer doesn't usually manage people. but some of them do.
Mhm.
There's very little about the role that is like, here is the taxonomy, you must fit exactly in this box. There's a lot of ways to do the job. So there are some staff engineers who are managers, but most of the time, staff engineers don't have direct reports. They're solving problems in a different way. They don't say, I'm going to deploy, these 3 people onto this team. There's like, often you're convincing somebody else to deploy people onto the team, or to set a project as the highest priority for an organization. So it's a more influence-based leadership. I mean, I think influence, even in a manager role, even with people reporting to you, it's still an influence. Like, I think most managers aren't like, you must go write code on this project right now, you have no choice. It's all like still influence, but even more so on the staff engineer side. Because you don't have direct reports, there's a whole lot of things that, a manager would spend a lot of time on, like hiring, performance management, and compensation planning, and headcount planning, and maybe where people sit, this sort of thing, that staff plus people, maybe you're a little involved in it, but not responsible for it. So you have more time to take care of the like the technical concerns of a group or an org. Like, what are our engineering standards? What projects should we be working on? How are we achieving them? Are people talking to each other? And you've got more time to notice what's not working. Like, one of the things I enjoy about not being a manager is that I have the time to read all of an RFC or a design document, which I think most managers you just don't have time if you've got a lot of reports. So it's a different style.
Well, and what are some of the key, you mentioned influence, but I'm just wondering, what are other like leadership skills you think staff engineer plus need to sort of think about or develop?
So we always say, communication, and that's such a big one, but that's like 30 different topics all in one. So
right.
Things like being able to explain why something is important in a way that another person will understand. Not like, here's why it's important to me, but instead, here's why it should be important to you. Here's something you care about. And I think that's a skill it's not really innate. Like, you see, a lot of engineers will start with like, we need to do this because here's how it makes my life better. And the person they're talking to was like, oh, okay, why do I care?
Right.
That's one. But it's like playing the other side of that as well, trying to understanding what someone's telling you. So there's a lot of forms of communication, like someone's giving you a lot of information and picking out the one piece of information that is, going to cause an outage, or that's going to delay a project by 3 months. So being able to listen to what someone else is saying and pick out the important stuff. Delivering messages to a lot of people at once. Here's another. When you've got something that needs to happen, you can't convince all of the people one at a time, or sometimes you can, but a lot of the time there's just too many people. So thinking about how to get a message, get a direction into the consciousness of a whole org. It's a weird amount of marketing sometimes in when you're trying to do a culture change or make a big project happen. There's like 30 more forms of communication, like explaining the status of a project without listing every single task, and instead being like, it's okay or it's not okay, this sort of thing, figuring out what people need to know. So that's all the communication stuff. But there's a lot of like making everyone around you better. That's really important. Like, it's not just you anymore working in your corner. Maybe it never really is. Even as a senior engineer, you're making people better. I've seen junior engineers who make their whole team better, like first job ever, and they're still like, you can see them raising everyone's game. But by staff engineering level, you have to be making your team better. Yeah. And part of that is understanding what they need. So being able to see, understand other people and see how they can be complete badass engineers. There's a lot of that. So it comes in the form of mentoring or coaching or so.
Well, and it's interesting too, when we say like what I think of as like building capacity in other people, right? Leveling people up. I think what's an interesting piece for me is that before this, they've probably been really rewarded for shipping code. And now, are they still rewarded for shipping code? And at some point that becomes a problem, right? They become a bottleneck. You can't just ship code. It's about how else do we level up the people around us to build capacity in all of us, which I think is a hard shift mindset too. And like, what's my value?
It's so hard. And especially like you write code and it works or it doesn't. It's like, you know how things are going.
Right. Right. Yes, no, works out. There's a testing, right? You red, green, yellow.
Yeah, it's like, ask the tests, am I doing a good job? And the tests are like, you're great. And you're like, thanks, tests.
Greens all the way.
Yeah. And then you move into this role where it's like, I'm trying to make something happen. And I was just in 8 meetings in a row. Like, did I do anything today? It's really stressful. And I think some people can handle that more than others. It's the sort of thing you can ramp up to, I think.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It's difficult.
Just noting that, right? That there's like this mental mindset shift of like, instead of me just going in and doing it, I have to figure out how to, change my mindset and see the value that I'm offering and figuring out how to transmit what I know in my head to other people. And that takes effort.
It really does. But it's the only way to scale.
Yeah.
Because there's only so much you can do on your own. Like, even if you're amazing, the best engineer in the world, you've got a finite number of hours in the week and you hit a cap of what you can do on your own. And at some point, your impact comes from making more and more people better.
Yep. That multiplier effect for leadership. We interviewed Liz Wiseman, her book Multipliers, but I think it also really applies to, the senior IC folks. So I want to go back to something you talked about a little bit earlier when you were talking about the 3 pillars. And figuring out, so like staff engineers have to figure out what projects to prioritize. So what can you offer them? Like, how do they figure out what to prioritize? Like,
it's so hard. So I've got a mental model for this, which is a pretty complicated mental model, but let me try and lay this whole thing out. So 2 things. You need to do work that's important for your organization at whatever scope you are, for your team or your group or your org or your business, whatever. You need to do something that's important. And that's, when people are more junior, you can kind of do a good job on something that doesn't matter. And you did a good job and we're all like, well done. But by the time you're staff, even like high senior, if you did a good job on something and it turned out not to be necessary, you kind of wasted a scarce resource. And it'll still happen and we learn from it. It happens to everybody. But you've got some responsibility for spending the scarce resource that is you. I don't mean it in like people, I have 3 resources on my team. I mean it like, but
right,
like you're
right.
There's one of you. Right. And it's like a lot of the time, there's a lot of work to be done. And there's stuff that you as the most senior engineer can do that other people can't do. And so if you're spending your time on something that someone else could have done and leaving something that only you could have done, then that's not a good allocation of resources. The org is kind of blocked on you. And there's also, if you're spending time on something that doesn't matter at all, that's not a good use of resources too. So to start with, you got to pick things that are important. It's not easy. And you think about how long will this thing take and what can't I do if I do this? But I think that's only half the story. It's a deal, because at some point, there's very likely to be so much that's important that you still have to choose. Like you just can't do all the important stuff. So what do you do now? And I think the other half of this is you got to pick projects that are kind of good for you, right for you. And I've got this idea that there are 5 like attributes. Do you know the video game The Sims? I spent way too much time playing The Sims back in the day. And when you play The Sims, there's like, you get a little dashboard of your person. It's a person simulator game, so you can pretend to be a person instead of being out in the world actually being a person. It's a good time. And your little sim person they have a certain amount of energy and comfort and so on. How hungry they are, and you've got to like keep all of their bars pretty full. And if they get down to zero, they're in danger. You get a sim and they're down to zero in hygiene, and no one wants to hang out with them anymore. So you got to just kind of keep them in good health. And it's kind of the same in engineering, with a different set of resources. So I think the 5 are your energy, your skills growth, social capital, credibility, and just your general quality of life. And all 5 of those, different projects will give you different things. So like, you may do a project that is amazing for social capital. It's really, your boss wants it the most in the world. It's so important. Everyone's going to think you're amazing. But when you look at the project, you're like, your heart sinks and you feel exhausted. You're like, I just don't want to do that. I just hate doing that. Or something that's important, but you're not going to learn anything at all from it. It's something you've done before. And that might be okay. Like, there's 5 things. It's so rare to get something that's, positive on all 5. Like, if you do, grab that project.
Yes.
Also important for the company, but it's a trade-off. So if you're like, I got a lot of social capital right now, my star is flying high, I can maybe pick something that I think is important, that I will learn a lot from. It's possibly not the thing, I've got a little bit of leeway to do something that's not as important to my org. It's still important, but, a little bit more leeway. Whereas if you're new to an org, what you want to do is solve the most important problem quickly and build kind of the goodwill of the org that comes with that.
Yeah, I mean, it's great to think. I love that you have like these 2 different paths. One, which is you, and these 5 things, and these are incredible. The book is great. I mean, definitely read the book. It's so incredible. But I also like the idea of like, what does the business need? What does the org need? And then also, one of the things that I heard hidden in there is like a question they could ask is like, who's the right person to do this? Am I the right person to do this project? Or is it somebody else? Do I need to take it on? Maybe it's somebody else, going back to like our building capacity in other people, and how do we use, because those folks are scarce, meaning and that, like, the resource, like what they bring to the organization is really highly valuable, and they have to be very careful with how they use their time. And we have to be careful as an org.
Completely. I saw this LeadDev talk a long time ago by Michael Lopp, where he said, you're going to see projects that you could get an A on. And you look at it and you're like, I could get an A on that. I would do amazing. And he said, that might be a good signal that you could find somebody who would get a B on it and coach them to like maybe an A-. They're not going to do as well as you would do. And like, you kind of make peace with that going in, but then you're not doing it. You can do something else that hopefully you have somebody coaching you up to an A- on. And it's, I don't know.
That's so great.
Resources. I really liked that talk. Yeah.
I love that idea of like, you could get an A, but they could get a B-. Like that just really clarifies it. And I think we all want to get that A, and we think about the A, but the B- or B+ or B-, and then raising somebody else up. Great. That's a great rubric.
Yeah.
All right, I want to kind of move on to one of the other pillars, which is, the execution. So what do you think is unexpectedly difficult part of executing on projects for a staff engineer?
So I think there's this funny thing where the projects get more difficult. And the way they get more difficult is often not a technical way. It's like, it's not like we want you to go and discover, do an amazing research project and discover an algorithm for doing something much faster than it's been done before. Or, we want you to invent something. Like sometimes that's the project, but more often it's difficult because there are people involved, or because there's legacy systems involved, or there's unclear support, or there's ambiguity, or everybody knows something is terrible, but they can't really define why it's terrible. Like you see this a lot in like old architecture projects where people are like, oh, we got to replace that system. What's wrong with it? Oh, it's just awful. I was like, okay,
Yeah.
well, what kind of awful, But if you ask 5 people, you'll get like at least 6 answers for what's wrong with it. And part of the problem is even understanding the problem. So you get these bigger, kind of more ambiguous, messier projects. And I think the thing that's difficult is we can have a tendency to look at these projects and say, oh, this project there are things in the way of me doing this project. I can't do it because it's got this legacy architecture, or I can't get to it because it's got 2 directors involved and they want different things and the requirements are unclear. So I can't do the project. But at staff engineer level, I think you got to think about it like all of that is part of the project. When you draw a circle around the project, it's not the technical stuff. That's actually most likely the part that you're going to hand off to somebody else. The difficult part is what are we even trying to do here? What does success look like? How do we get people aligned on this? Oh, this crosses like 5 teams who hate each other. Okay, that's the problem. Like the problem is not it's not the code here. You got to get the 5 teams together. The way I think about this a lot is like it's like if you're going for a hike and you don't say, oh man, this hike, I wish I could get to the hike, but the mountain is in the way. It's like, no, the mountain is the point. That's why you're doing this. If the project was easy, then they wouldn't need you. They would give it to somebody more junior. So I think that's the big mental shift, that like all of this extra stuff is in there and that it's your problem to solve. It's like, it's not, oh, someone should clean this project up and before I start it. It's like, no, you're the someone. Sucks.
Well, and I love too, like you draw the circle and that you were like, the technical stuff is what somebody else is going to do it. And I'm sure a few people's hearts just sank like, oh no, I like the technical. I thought when I would go forward as a technical person and senior, I'm doing more technical. And what I hear is, it's not necessarily doing more technical aspects. Maybe you're doing some, but you're adding a whole bunch of other things.
Right. I mean, sometimes the technical problem really is what's needed. I don't want to say get to staff engineer and you just close your IDE and never go to code again. Although I really spend more time in Google Docs than I do in an IDE. But there's like, so sometimes that is going to be the difficult part. But very often the difficult part is doing even for the technical stuff, it's do the first part, like get a model for how you're going to solve it, or get the architecture right, or mentor somebody else and be their guardrails, as they solve the problem and kind of help them and boost them to solve the problem. So you're most of the time, again, there are exceptions, but most of the time you're probably not there to dive into the code.
Yeah, I think it's a great answer. I'm going to ask one more question. I'm going to go, there's some great audience questions. I'm going to ask one more question from me, and then I'm going to go to the audience. So my favorite chapter title is You're a Role Model Now. Sorry. So like, I want to know like why you titled that and what's hard about it, what's important about the whole role model piece.
That was originally the first chapter of the book. So apparently this is and that's what I wrote first. So apparently this was weighing pretty heavily on my mind when I wrote it. But it's a real adjustment, I think, to go from being responsible for yourself to being a leader, a tech leader in the org. And I think a lot of people, when they kind of get to high senior staff level, they're like, well, I don't want to be a leader. So just, I'm just going to be over here in the corner. I'm going to solve engineering problems, going to be a badass technologist. And it's like, cool, like it or not, you're now a role model. You don't really get a choice in the matter by getting to that level. Everybody else is, when they think about what does good engineering look like, it's whatever you're doing, which is really stressful when you realize if you cut corners, you're saying we cut corners here. And if you don't write tests, you're saying we don't write tests here. And if you write 60-page documents that nobody can read, that's normal. That's what senior engineers or staff engineers do, and so that's what everyone else will do too. You end up as well, like you said, you're setting the engineering technical culture, but you're also to some extent setting the humaning culture. So like if people are scared to come ask you questions because they think you're going to be mean, that's kind of the culture. That's people don't ask each other questions because they expect meanness in return. And I think a lot of the time people don't even, no one thinks they're going to be mean. They just think, well, I'm just doing my own thing. I'm not, I'm a little brusque. I'm not a people person. I don't, nobody hired me to be helpful. I'm not trying to be mean about it. I'm just, nobody hired me for this. But the thing is, you're setting the culture for the whole org if you're not helping other people, if you're the most senior engineer. Whereas if the senior people are, very open, very transparent, if they help other people, if they admit what they don't know, like anytime a senior person shows up in a Slack channel or, on a mailing list, and it's like, I think, here's something I don't understand. I think you're saying this, but could it be that? Or where can I learn more? That's setting the culture too. That's saying like, for the rest of your career, you're going to be learning stuff. There's going to be stuff you don't know. The industry is just too big to know everything. And I think that sets a really good example too. So it's an adjustment to being a role model, but it kind of comes with the gig, unfortunately.
Well, and I love that you bring up too, I want to get to questions, but I love that you bring up culture too, because we tend to think culture is like over there or somebody else's responsibility. But as a staff engineer, culture is part of your role, and you are influencing it. Like you said, whether you want to or not, you are influencing it.
Yeah. Culture is what everyone does, and you're leading what everyone does. So,
you sure are. Yep. Yeah. Sorry is like the perfect word for that. All right. I have a question here. So this person's looking for tips for navigating a chaotic organization where you were hired as a principal, can see the org needs, staff level engineering attention, are spending most of your time onboarding, leveling up the group, but the feedback is you're not getting enough tickets done, or the code reviews are taking too long.
Oof.
Yeah. It's a tough one.
It is, because in this case, there's a real disconnect between your own judgment for what is needed. And presumably you're talking about the judgment of whoever hired you, whoever is, who's paying you, who's writing your performance reviews. And, getting those aligned is pretty important, assuming you like being paid and having good performance reviews and having social capital in your org. So it's really hard to look at a mess and not fix it. I totally get that. I am the same. But if that's not being rewarded, or rewarded is the wrong, but if it's not recognized, if that's not what your boss or your org wants you to do, I would not keep pushing on it without being really explicit that that's what I'm doing. Like, I think one of the important things to do in any role, but especially in these weird, ambiguous staff plus roles, is to get aligned on what the heck your job is, which feels so, it feels so weird, but it's still your idea and your manager's idea may be different. And I like to do this in writing. Like I write down my job. I think my job is XYZ. I expect to deliver this set of things. I don't expect to do this sort of thing. Like, just sort of short, but really explicit. And I say, is this what you think my job is? And if not, I write down what I think they think the job is. And maybe it doesn't match. Like, to some extent, you can, like, for a while, you can probably push against it. You see that the real problems are not technical problems, and you're trying to do the organizational stuff as well. But I would keep track of whether you're shifting, like, in a way, you're trying to do a culture change here to make people recognize that as work. And if that's not happening and it's not changing over time, you may be in the wrong place. I'm sorry to say it.
That's great.
Hopefully you can change it.
Yep.
That's
a great answer.
After that, I guess. Yeah.
That's so great. I want to get to one more question. And there's a couple questions that are around the same thing. And so I'm going to read a couple questions. How can a staff engineer be successful in a smaller organization? Is an org with 15 to 20 engineers big enough to support a staff role? Also, there's another question like, do you have any guidance to help us decide what size org to introduce the staff or staff plus role? There's a lot around the sizing and that staff plus role here.
I would say, don't introduce it till you need it. Maybe that's obvious. If you're, a little startup just trying to, you got a small team, and you're just trying to get stuff to market, and what really matters is you're writing a lot of code. Everybody's kind of working on their own or in a, very, very small. You don't need it. You don't need the extra leadership bandwidth. You don't need anybody kind of gluing things together. But after a while, you will probably notice, as you grow, you will probably notice that somebody is doing the job, whether you have it or not, or that things are falling down. So either you've got a bunch of teams who never talk to each other, or who have no real, who all have their own incentives and they're all solving local maximum problems, but the big picture is getting lost. Which you can sort of see, you can feel it, you can feel that at an org, or you need a bigger direction than any person in one team could create. Nobody feels like they have that kind of ownership or responsibility, or the manager's trying to do it while also managing a bunch of people, and they just don't have the bandwidth. And so what you need it when you feel like you need it. That's such a hand wavy answer, but I think it's so much about staff engineering is #it depends. It depends on when you feel it. But chances are, if you get to, I don't know if you need a 10 or 15 people. It's it depends. It depends on your org. But if you get bigger, and you feel like you don't need it, chances are somebody is doing that job. Like the person who asked that question before about organizational chaos, somebody is getting told, you're not filing, you're not finishing enough tickets, you haven't written enough lines of code. The organization is running really smoothly though. So keep an eye out for who's doing that job and whether they're getting in trouble for doing that job, and give them a staff engineer title and leave them alone to keep doing what they're doing.
I love that. That was a great question. We're going to end there. Thank you so much for joining us during the session. Tanya will be joining us over on the LeadDev Slack, where she'll be taking some questions. I couldn't get to all of them, but I tried to get to the ones that were pretty prominent and repeats. So head over to the Bookmarked channel where that'll be taking place. Our next session will be on December 6th, where we'll be speaking with Laura Hogan, we talked about earlier, on her book. Yeah, she's great. Resilient Management. And on December 7th, we'll be speaking with Lima Nasri on her book, Exploring A/B Testing. Thanks for being here again.
Thank you very much for having me.